It was meant to be a simple dinner, nothing extravagant, just a modest gathering at Claire and Adam's house with a few of Claire's colleagues. Eleanor had arrived early, as she always did, carrying a bottle of wine in one hand and her signature lemon tart in the other, the same tart Claire used to beg for every birthday as a child. The house was beautiful, polished in that magazine-perfect way. Eleanor, ever the quiet presence, helped set the table without being asked. She wiped down counters, repositioned candles out of reach, and gently reminded her grandson Lucas not to play too close to the open flame. It was instinct. That's what mothers do, help silently, without expectation, without thanks. Laughter soon filled the room, soft jazz playing in the background. Claire's voice rang clearly above the others, poised, witty, performative. Eleanor took a seat at the far end of the table, smiling politely, always careful not to intrude. When Lucas reached for a sharp fork, Eleanor gently said, "Sweetheart, be careful with that." And that's when it happened. Claire didn't even glance in her mother's direction. Her voice, light and laced with humor, landed effortlessly. "We don't need your opinion, Mom." One of the guests chuckled, unsure. The room fell quiet. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her glass. Her expression didn't change, but the warmth drained from her face. The comment hadn't been angry. It was worse, it had been casual, effortless, practiced. A line rehearsed for just the right moment. She didn't respond. No sharp words, no wounded gasps, only a smile, faint, controlled, the kind worn by those who have perfected the art of holding themselves together. Quietly, she excused herself and stepped out into the evening. In the kitchen, Eleanor set her dish down with care, wiped her hands on a towel, and moved toward the door. The air outside was crisp, dusk clinging to the sky like fading ink. The world felt still, removed. That moment didn't erupt with fury or collapse into grief. What Eleanor felt was something colder, clearer, clarity. Not the clarity that demands revenge, the kind that recognizes a quiet truth. She had been erased. Sitting in her car, Eleanor stared through the windshield, hands resting on the steering wheel. Her phone lay beside her. She scrolled absently through old texts, Claire's messages from years ago. "Couldn't do this without you, Mom. Thanks for always being there." Words that now felt like shadows. She opened her contacts and tapped a name she hadn't called in years. Tom, Will, Trust. It rang twice. "Tom, it's Eleanor," she said, voice steady. "I'd like to update my will." There was a pause on the other end. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" She took a deep breath. "It's time I made decisions that reflect the woman I've always been, not the one my daughter remembers when it suits her." In that still moment, with the chill of evening settling around her, Eleanor made a silent vow. No more waiting to be appreciated. No more shrinking into the corner of someone else's life. This wasn't anger. It wasn't spite. It was reclamation. And it was just the beginning. That night, after calling Tom, Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't curse the air or drown in old photo albums. She simply sat at her kitchen table, the same table where Claire used to do her homework, and let the past come back, not as pain, but as clarity. She remembered the morning her world cracked open. She was just 27 when her husband, Daniel, collapsed from a stroke, never to wake again. Claire had only been 6. Eleanor could still feel the weight of that little hand clutching hers at the funeral, the small, trembling voice that had asked, "Is Daddy ever coming home?" And how she had whispered, through her own heartbreak, "No, sweetie, but Mommy's here, always." And she had kept that promise. For years, Eleanor worked double shifts at the local library and took freelance editing jobs at night. She skipped holidays, wore secondhand coats, and turned down every invitation that required money she didn't have. Her only indulgence was watching Claire sleep curled up, safe, dreaming, unaware of the world her mother fought each day to protect her from. She never kept count, never tallied the hours missed, meals skipped, or dreams shelved. She simply gave, because that's what love meant to her, quiet, persistent giving. When Claire got into Northwestern, Eleanor cried in the stairwell of her work building. She had no idea how she'd manage the tuition. But the answer had been sitting in her jewelry box all along, a delicate sapphire necklace passed down from her grandmother. It wasn't much by market standards, but it was priceless to Hera thread tying generations together. She sold it without hesitation. Claire never asked her to, but she didn't object either. Back then, it had felt like a gift-on investment in the woman her daughter was becoming. Eleanor didn't need gratitude. She just wanted to see Claire thrive. And Claire did. She graduated with honors, landed a competitive role at a finance firm, married Adam polished, ambitious, a man who looked at the world like it was something to be conquered. They had Lucas 3 years later. Eleanor was there in the delivery room, whispering encouragement through contractions, gripping Claire's hand through every push. When Lucas arrived, Claire had turned to her, eyes filled with tears, and said, "I get it now, Mom. I really do." Eleanor had held on to that sentence like scripture. In the early years, Claire called daily, sent photos, texted little updates with words like, "Couldn't do this without you." Eleanor helped with Lucas 3 days a week, packed lunches, made dinner, folded tiny socks. Sundays were for brunches and the occasional shopping trip, just the two of them. She felt needed, respected, loved. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things shifted. The calls became shorter, then fewer, then none at all unless Eleanor reached out first. Plans were rescheduled, then forgotten. Her advice once welcomed became interruptions. Her presence, once comforting, became a background detail to be managed. Little things, like the birthday card Claire forgot to sign, the family story she waved off with an eye roll, the way she introduced Eleanor as "my mom" without warmth, as if Eleanor were a piece of furniture she couldn't quite get rid of. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it hurt more. It was a slow erasure, one polite shrug at a time. Eleanor didn't complain, didn't confront. That wasn't her way. She just adjusted, the way mothers always down till one day. She realized she had adjusted so far that she'd disappeared. And now, sitting in that same kitchen, bathed in the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of an old wall clock, she saw it clearly. Her love had always been unconditional, but being unseen, that was never part of the promise. It didn't take a dramatic blowout or a final fight. The unraveling came gently, quiet and polite, like someone slowly dimming the lights in a room they no longer wanted you in. At first, Eleanor tried to explain it away. "Claire's just busy," she told herself. "The new promotion must be overwhelming." When the calls stopped coming regularly, she took the initiative, left voicemails full of updates and warmth. When they went unanswered, she sent brief messages. "Thinking of you. Let me know if you need anything. Miss Lucas." She didn't expect long conversations, but what she got, cold emojis, the occasional thumbs up, a vague "will do," felt like a transaction, not a connection. Holidays came and went. Thanksgiving? Claire said they were traveling with Adam's work friends. Christmas? "We're keeping it quiet this year, just the 3 of us." Eleanor baked her famous cinnamon rolls anyway, wrapped a gift for Lucas and left it on the porch to receive a text a day later. "Thanks, Mom. He liked it. No photo, no call." By spring, her Tuesday and Thursday pickups, the ones that once belonged to her and Lucas, had quietly been reassigned. One day she arrived at the daycare, only to be told that Lucas had already been picked up. His mom said something about a new arrangement. The receptionist explained gently. There had been no warning, no heads up, just silence. Eleanor sat in her car that day, staring at the dashboard like it might offer clarity. She didn't cry. She didn't even call Claire. What would she say? That she'd been replaced? That her time with her grandson had been silently revoked without so much as a conversation? No. She knew what Claire would say. "Don't overthink it, Mom. We're just adjusting our schedule. It's not personal." But it was. Because everything Eleanor had ever done every afternoon spent feeding ducks, every bedtime story whispered in that cozy living room was suddenly erased like chalk off a board. As if her presence had expired. As if she was no longer the grandmother who mattered. The next wave of silence came with birthdays. Lucas's fifth arrived without an invitation. Eleanor found out later through a neighbor who followed Claire on social media there had been a party. Balloons, a magician, catered cupcakes, strangers, not family, not her. She asked about the old wooden toy chest, the one she had restored from Claire's childhood for Lucas. Claire shrugged. We donated it during our last garage cleanout. A lifetime of memories, gone in a blink. There was no single explosion, just the steady dulling of a once vibrant bond. Eleanor began to feel like background noise, someone to tolerate when convenient, to ignore when not. Even in church, acquaintances began to ask gently, "How's Claire? Haven't seen her in a while." Eleanor would smile, murmur, "Busy as always," and retreat to the restroom until the knot in her throat loosened. She wasn't angry, not yet, just invisible. The kind of invisible that comes not from hiding but from being carefully, deliberately edited out. She stopped suggesting family dinners, stopped offering to help, stopped texting unless Claire reached out first, which rarely happened. Every time she lifted her phone, her hand would pause. Would it annoy Claire? Would it be ignored? Her home, once filled with laughter and the scent of Lucas's favorite soup, had gone quiet. The couch felt too large. The table is too bare. Eleanor had always believed that love, especially a mother's love, was eternal, unshakable, and unquestioned. But now, she felt like a ghost in a story she used to be the main character in. And perhaps that was the most painful part. Not that she was no longer needed, but no one seemed to notice she was gone. Eleanor didn't slam doors or raise her voice. She didn't send Claire a scathing letter or demand an explanation for the slow erasure of their bond. She simply stopped trying to be seen by those who refused to look. And in that stillness, something shifted, not out of spite, but out of survival. One quiet afternoon, Eleanor walked into her study and pulled out the green folder from the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, her will. It had been drafted years earlier, at a time when her world still revolved around Claire, her daughter, her pride, her presumed legacy. She read each line slowly, like she was peeling away layers of a life that no longer fit. Claire's name was everywhere: the house, the savings, the jewelry passed down from her mother and grandmother. Eleanor had carefully grown across decades of modest living. All of it had once been promised to Claire, with the unspoken hope that love would carry it forward. But promises built on blind devotion no longer made sense. She picked up her pen. When Eleanor met with her attorney the following week, she came prepared. The meeting was brief, calm, clinical, almost too simple for a decision so vast. Claire was removed as the primary beneficiary. Instead, Eleanor designated her home to a nonprofit that provided transitional housing for single mothers. She understood, perhaps better than most, the weight of parenting alone and the power of having a safe space to rebuild. Her savings would go toward a scholarship fund for women over 30 who were returning to school after raising children, mothers with dreams that had been paused but never extinguished. Her jewelry, each piece tied to a chapter of her history, would be split between two causes. One, an auction to raise funds for a local women's shelter, and the rest placed in a trust for her grandson Lucas, to be accessed when he was old enough to understand the value of legacy, not just in gold, but in story. Eleanor left the attorney's office with no fanfare, no tears, just a gentle breath of release. Back home, she began to fill her days with intention. She signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. Her hands were a bit shaky, her lines not quite steady, but the colors brought her a quiet kind of joy. She pulled her old piano bench from storage and began to play again, clumsy at first, but faithful. The notes were rusty, but they belonged to her. She visited the library more often, choosing thick novels she used to skip when she was too busy organizing Claire's life. And most importantly, she wrote. Not to Claire, not to Lucas, but to herself. She filled pages with memories, reflections, even gentle reassurances to the woman she was learning to become. She wrote letters to her younger self, reminding her that sacrifice had value, but that self-worth should never be negotiated. She wrote to her future self, too promising not to vanish again in someone else's shadow. Each morning, Eleanor brewed her tea, opened a window, and gave thanks not for what she had lost, but for what she was reclaiming: peace, autonomy, voice. She didn't need Claire to validate her anymore. She didn't wait by the phone, didn't linger in silence hoping to be needed, because she had learned something most women spend their whole lives forgetting: that you can be kind and still have boundaries, that you can love deeply and still walk away when love stops being returned, that you can be invisible to others and still rediscover yourself. Eleanor wasn't chasing a new beginning. She was simply choosing not to end where someone else left her. And in those small, unglamorous acts, painting, playing, writing, she was quietly, powerfully coming back to life. Claire sensed it before she ever saw it written on paper. At first, it was just a feeling, an unsettling quiet in her mother's presence, a gentleness that didn't reach the eyes. Eleanor had become different, softer somehow, but distant. She wasn't waiting anymore. She wasn't offering, reminding, filling in the blanks. She was simply there, calm, composed, untethered. One afternoon, Claire sat down and typed out a message. Not a text, but a letter carefully worded, tentative. "Hi, Mom. I know things have felt off between us. I'd like to talk, if you're open to it." She folded it, placed it in an envelope, and mailed it. But no reply came. Then the invitation arrived. A formal one, handwritten, a reading of the will. It felt jarring. Not because Eleanor was unwell, she wasn't, but because the very act was so unlike her. Or perhaps it was finally exactly like her. A woman who had spent her life giving was now, without ceremony, reclaiming. Claire arrived at the attorney's office, unsure of what to expect. Mark came along, more out of curiosity than concern. Lucas fidgeted beside her, old enough now to understand that something serious was about to unfold. Eleanor sat across from them, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She wore the navy sweater Claire remembered from childhood parent-teacher night, simple, strong, dependable. Judith, Eleanor's sister-in-law, sat beside her with a quiet but firm presence. The attorney began. One by one, the details were read aloud. The house donated to a shelter for single mothers. The savings allocated to scholarships for women restarting their education. The jewelry part gifted to charity, part set aside for Lucas under specific terms. Claire listened in growing disbelief. Her name was never mentioned. Not once. Her throat tightened. Her hands went clammy in her lap. By the end, the silence in the room was heavy, pulsing with things unsaid. Then Eleanor spoke. Her voice was steady, soft, but with the weight of 1,000 unspoken moments behind it. "I didn't do this to hurt you," she began. "This isn't punishment." She turned her gaze directly toward Claire. "This is recognition of myself, of the years I showed up, of the countless moments I was dismissed, reduced, or overlooked. I gave because I loved. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen as a person. I became something, convenient background noise in your carefully curated life." Claire opened her mouth to respond, her voice thin. "Mom, I didn't mean." But Eleanor gently raised a hand. "No, let me finish, because this is the only time we will have this conversation." Claire froze. Mark leaned slightly away from her, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. Eleanor continued, "I forgave more than you ever knew. I stayed silent more than I should have. But this will isn't about bitterness. It's about choosing peace. For myself." She looked at Lucas then, the boy who once curled beside her for bedtime stories. He was older now, quiet, uncertain. But when Eleanor met his eyes, something passed between them. He stood, walked across the room, and wrapped his arms around her. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That one gesture, a quiet, unfiltered embrace, spoke louder than any apology could. Eleanor placed a hand gently on his back, holding him for a long moment. Claire sat motionless, her face pale, not angry, just lost, as if realizing too late that the map she'd followed for years no longer led to where she thought. Eleanor stood, her purse in hand. "This is the last time I'll explain myself," she said with finality. "From here on, I choose peace. You may not understand that now, but someday I hope you will." Then, without drama or tears, she left the room, not broken, but whole. And behind her, she left more than a void, she left a boundary. And in doing so, found her voice. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope with Claire's name neatly written in the corner. Eleanor didn't rush to open it. She set it aside on the table, poured herself a cup of tea, and took it outside to the garden where the lavender was just starting to bloom. Only after the steam had cooled from her cup did she return to the envelope, unfolding the paper with deliberate hands. It wasn't long. 3 paragraphs. No elaborate excuses, no promises of change, just a quiet acknowledgement. "I see it now, the ways I pushed you aside. I thought you'd always be there, and I never stopped to ask what that cost you. I'm sorry. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know." There was no reply. Not because Eleanor held resentment, but because the silence had become her boundary, a space she had fought to earn. Later that week, a text from Adam, her son-in-law, lit up her phone. "I read the will. You were right. About everything. I just wanted you to know that I see it too now." Eleanor stared at the message for a long moment, then replied with 3 words. "Thank you, Adam." It was enough. And then, the most unexpected gift of all arrived, a handwritten letter from Lucas. The envelope was marked in blocky, adolescent penmanship. Inside was a single page. "Hi, Grandma. I'm doing a school project about family history. Mom said you know a lot. Could I ask you some questions? I'd like to know where we come from." Eleanor smiled gently, quietly. Her fingers grazed the edge of the paper like it might dissolve if she held it too tightly. That evening, she sat at her desk and began to write back. Her words were careful, thoughtful. There was warmth in them, but not sentimentality. She didn't shield the truth, nor did she use it as a weapon. She simply told Lucas stories of their ancestors, of resilience, of names that had long since faded from family photographs, but still echoed in her memory. She closed the letter with a single line. "Our roots run deep, Lucas, and you're part of something stronger than you know." No dramatic reunions followed. There was no scene on the front porch, no apologies whispered through tears. Claire didn't show up with flowers, and Eleanor didn't wait for her to. Instead, Eleanor began to truly live not as someone's mother, someone's helper, or someone's forgotten fixture, but as herself. She spent mornings tending to her small garden, pruning roses, coaxing herbs to life. Afternoons were filled with watercolors and thick novels, the kind she used to shelve for later when life was too busy to read. Evenings were peaceful, soft jazz on the record player, tea in a handmade mug, and windows open to the hum of crickets. She framed one of her paintings, an abstract blend of violet and green, and hung it where Claire's old photo used to be. Not out of spite, but as a quiet celebration of what she'd reclaimed. One Saturday, she received another letter from Lucas. He wrote about a poem he'd written in class, about a dream he had where they were cooking together, and about how much he missed her grilled cheese sandwiches. At the end, he signed it, "Love you, Grandma. I always will." Eleanor read it twice, then placed it carefully inside a small wooden box labeled "Letters That Matter." The seasons continued to turn. Eleanor did not become bitter. She did not become vindictive. She became free. And in her freedom, there was peace. A quiet, steady kind, the kind that doesn't come from being needed, but from knowing you no longer have to beg to be seen. Because love, real love, is not something to be bartered or begged for. It is not owed. It is chosen. And finally, Eleanor chose herself.